We're here with Professor Leonie Huddy at Stony Brook University talking about polling with our student guest, Elvis Kreppy. How are you both?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah.
Good.
So in the past, you did an interview a few years ago with the Center for News Literacy here at Stony Brook University, speaking about how even yourself, being an expert in polling, sometimes finds that when you watch news, you have a difficulty gauging where they're getting their information from or how accurate the polls are. And you did say at that point that 800 to 1,000 people is really relevant for an accurate analysis. Could you tell me a little bit about why that is?
Well, basically, when you're looking at a big population like the United States, you want to make sure that you capture all the varieties of opinion in that country. If I take 10 people, we can get a very weird group,
right,
and they would not be representative. We start to get 100 people, we start to tap into the variety and possibly the distribution of those ideas. And when we get to about 800, there are diminishing returns to going to 1,000 or 2,000. So it's really, yes, it would be a little bit better. We've got some more people, but by about 800 to 1,000, we've already got a pretty good picture of what any population. It could be a population of 10,000 or 260 million people. It doesn't matter, but that is about the right number.
Okay. Do you think that nowadays, given that more and more people are getting their news from different sources that aren't as centralized, is it harder to gauge public opinion now that, you know, there are more polls being done through things like Facebook and Twitter?
This goes back to the original interview about how do we judge whether a poll is good. Our first question is, have we done a pretty good job of sampling across the whole population? If we think someone is missing, a certain group of people is missing, for example, if we think that, let's say, the older generation, those who are 80 and older, are less likely to be on Facebook or other sources, a poll won't be as good.
Right.
We'll be missing them, and they turn out to be very loyal voters. So they're very likely to show up at the polls. So that's a problem. I mean, I think there are ways to try and get around it, but there are different ways of reaching people. One is by telephone, and typically in this day and age, a lot of polls are still done by phone. And
right,
those older people are reachable. Most people are reachable by a cell phone or a landline still today.
Yeah, true. Elvis, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on, like, what kind of polls do you pay attention to when you're trying to figure out what people are thinking?
So it's very interesting, as you mentioned, the state of climate of our polling. I feel like a lot of the polls in this day and age are garnered towards like those loyal voters, those voters that are more inclined to vote along their views and things like that. And one of the polls that I pay attention to most likely are like the Gallup poll, and the Gallup poll is like that poll that tells you which the approval rating of like the president or like approval rating of certain like topics that are prevalent in the country. So it's very interesting to find like my reasoning. It's very interesting to find that where these polls are garnered to, because I feel like there's a problem with young people not being represented in that polling climate. It's more garnered towards, you said, like them calling, and like a lot of these people that they're calling probably are people that are like, you know, over 50 years old.
So what you're saying is you think we're getting a smaller picture than what might be drawable?
Yeah, because as a young person myself, I haven't really experienced I don't know about other young people, but like I know myself, I haven't really experienced very much in depth into like the polling, because I've never been really asked to like do a poll. So
right,
it's very interesting.
And can I just add that most people haven't?
Yeah.
You know, the chance that you're selected for one of these polls is low. If even when there are a lot of them, it's still 800 people out of a very large American population. So what I would say in response to Elvis is it is a problem getting younger people. Why is that? First, they're harder to reach.
Yeah.
And second, they're less inclined to do it.
Yeah.
So this is an appeal to everybody out there who's watching. do the poll.
Yeah.
And make sure you know who's asking. If
Definitely.
it's CBS, if it's Gallup, if it's a reputable organization, do it.
Now, going
Yeah.
off of what you just said, I think it's really interesting because I've noticed a trend, a rise in targeted polling. That is to say, polls that are designed to elicit a certain response out of people. And the biggest one that I've noticed recently is the president actually has a website out called action.donaldtrump.com, where he has what's called a media accountability survey. And almost every question is loaded, in my opinion at least, to sort of give a negative view of the way mainstream media is representing the president and his, agenda. Do you have any advice to young people or just anyone in general about how to sort of cut through the chaff?
So this is a very basic point. The first question you should ask in looking at a poll is, was it a group of volunteers? In other words, did somebody just post a link and say, whoever wants to answer this, go ahead? That is not anything that you should pay attention to. It means nothing. It just means that the people who follow Donald Trump online have a certain viewpoint. It's not representative of the country. So you should always look, if you can, to see who and how. Was it a national poll? And was there some kind of framework underlying this? For example, like a list of telephone numbers through which people are randomly selected to participate.
Yep.
That's crucial.
Right.
Without that, they mean nothing. It's just fun, it's entertaining, but it's not really information that you should believe in.
Okay.
One of the things that I want to add to that is that it's very interesting when you talk about targeted polling and how polling target, it's really interesting because with polling, it's like a lot of people, like you said, there's a small number, young people are not that inclined to do polling, but yet our social media climate is very high on young people. So if they can find a way to fuse the polling with the social media, because a lot of young people get their news from Twitter, from Facebook, more inclined
And let me just add that there are some companies, and the New York Times uses one, where they do in fact use what I would call volunteers. These are people who have agreed to take surveys for a small payment or for points. What the company does beforehand is it will say, I need so many people in all of these different groupings.
Yeah.
I need X number of people who are 18 to 24, and they need to be living here, there, and elsewhere, and they invite the people in their panel on that basis. It's called matched sampling. That is pretty good. So it's not just, anybody on Facebook answer a poll.
Yeah.
It is, again, an invitation. Where they expect to get a profile of people that match the country. And in that way, you can, in fact, increase the presence of young people in these polls. My big concern about this upcoming election, this is just, you haven't asked me this, but I'm going to say it, is that part of the problem with pre-election polls is knowing who, in fact, is going to vote.
Yeah.
And people often go on past models. That was a problem in 2016. It's a whole other matter. But let's say voter turnout efforts really work among young people in this election.
Right.
The polls are not going to get that.
Yeah.
Because no one knows how to estimate what percentage of the electorate
People are
will
voting.
be young
Yeah.
people, because they often try to readjust after they get the poll
So,
information.
so what you're saying is that we don't really know for sure how big the so-called blue wave would actually be, because it's hard to gauge that information beforehand.
People are asked, are you going to vote? That's one way to try and figure out who's going to show up. Well, a lot of people say, yeah, sure, I'm going to go vote, and then they don't. So then you ask, well, did you vote last time? And what about some other things that might help me understand if you're going to vote? But if you're a young voter, what questions do I ask you to know for sure that you're
Right.
going to vote? So I think it's going to be very difficult, especially for state polls, to know for sure are young voters going to show up and in what numbers. If they go with previous, those numbers have been low.
Yeah. And if you brought the New York Times in this, the New York Times is, our president and his view towards the New York Times. So that can also be an issue, like targeted voting in sense of social media. Some social medias are more conservative, some are more liberal. So still.
Yeah, and I think that will be it for our time today. I appreciate both of you, and I hope that you get out to vote.
Okay.